Hello, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be sharing with you today during the Risk Awareness Week for 2019. My name is Daniel Udochi, and I will be speaking to you on the topic Managing Risk Attitudes for Better Decision Making. Before getting into the presentation proper, I'd like to take a minute or two to give you a bit of my background. I work with MTN, a mobile telecommunications organization with operations in over 20 countries within the Middle East and Africa regions. I am presently the General Manager responsible for risk, ethics, and compliance at MTN Sudan. I have over 15 years executive leadership experience at both country and regional levels. Most of my experience has been within the governance, risk, and compliance space across the ICT, logistics, and banking industries. You can look me up on LinkedIn should you want to know a bit more about my professional career and profile. Okay, so we'll get into the presentation proper now. Today's agenda will start off by looking at organizational risk. And here I just want to create a common understanding for what risk means in the context of the organization. Thereafter, I'll touch on best practices. So how organizations are managed, what tools or frameworks are available for organizations to manage their risk. And we will then look to see, get a view on the stakeholders' verdict with respect to risk management initiatives in their organizations. And I will then take a closer look at how organizations implement risk in practice. Following this, I'll hopefully lead into a possible missing link in our current practices. This will take us on to discussions around risk-informed decisions and the factors, visible and invisible factors that influence these decisions. And finally, we'll touch on the crux of the matter, in my opinion, which is how we make these invisible factors visible so that they can be adequately addressed. I will then do a wrap-up to just highlight some of the key points from my presentation, and we'll close thereafter. So this is basically what we'll try to do during the course of this presentation today. Every organization has a plan. The plan usually details how the organization intends to go about achieving a set of objectives. You can call this the strategic plan, the operating model, the business model, right? The plan is usually a well thought through document. It is logical, and to some degree, it is rational. In preparing the plan, the organization would typically attempt to cater for uncertainty within its operating environment as best as it can. However, during plan execution, reality tends to set in and the uncertainty factor begins to manifest in real time. This causes the organization to respond or react by making changes to its plan, taking detours, changing strategy, operating models, and so on in a bid to ensure that the set objectives are not jeopardized. So clearly, the organization's ability to anticipate risks and respond accordingly by making informed decisions based on optimal risk-reward mix increases its chances of achieving the set objectives. This really is what risk means in the context of organizations, right? Having looked at risk in the context of organizations, the question now is, how have organizations responded in efforts to address these uncertainties within the environment? Typically, there are various standards, frameworks, and models organizations use. The ISO 31000 risk management standard is one of the favorites. The COSO enterprise risk management with its 5 components and 23 principles. Similarly, the NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology risk management framework, control objectives for information technology, the ISACA framework, the OCEG, Open Compliance and Ethics Group, GRC capability model, also known as the Red Book. All these various frameworks, standards, and models are typically the ways and means that organizations attempt to address the uncertainties within their environment. Basically, they try to take these standards and align their risk initiatives to these standards or frameworks and use that as a basis for driving risk initiatives within their organizations. Given the various risk management standards and frameworks that are available, that provide guidance for risk management implementation within the organization, it's quite important to see what key stakeholders perceive in terms of the value risk management brings to the business or the concerns they have. we'll start off with the Audit Committee's perspective. And for this, I turn to the KPMG 2019 Audit Committee Pulse Survey. Amongst the greatest challenges with respect to their oversight role, they highlight two key issues which clearly falls within the domain of risk management. And this is monitoring fraud risk, as well as assessing key assumptions underlying critical accounting estimates. Now, these are two key challenges identified by the Audit Committee. Other comments border around the lack of confidence in their enterprise risk management processes to capture disruptive risks, right? Again, these are areas that clearly fall within the risk domain and create a significant challenge for the Audit Committee. We can also glean some insight into corporate executives' perspectives on risk management by reviewing top risks they have identified for 2019. One of the items on this top risk stands out for me, primarily because it relates to risk culture. It highlights a point which talks about the organization's inability to sufficiently encourage the timely identification and escalation of risk issues. Now, in my view, risk management is largely responsible to secure buy-in as well as drive the appropriate risk culture for the organization. And if we take a closer look at this particular survey, at the particular survey results, we'll see that the risk culture issue has been a top risk for execs for the last 3 years, with a higher number of execs flagging it as a top issue each consecutive year. This, in my mind, is indicative of the execs' level of confidence in RM's ability to continue to successfully drive the required culture within the organization. Still on corporate executives' perspective with regards to risk management, the State of ARM report from the North Carolina State University provides some direct insights. On the state of the risk environment, the report highlights execs' concern or perception that uncertainties within the business environment are leading to more complex risks. While on the ARM maturity, the report paints a rather dismal picture as it highlights that despite concerns about the number of potential risk issues on the horizon, few executives describe their organization's risk approach to risk management as mature. Worse still, the perceived level of maturity appears to have declined over the last 2 years. So this is the verdict on our current risk management practice as seen from the viewpoint of the corporate execs. Following up on the perception of corporate execs regarding uncertainties within their business environment, and these uncertainties leading to more complex risks, we can explain this concern using Charles Perrow's normal accident theory. The theory postulates that the more complex and tightly coupled systems become, the more accidents become normal within such systems. Okay, so with the advancement in technology, we're talking cloud technologies, AI, blockchain, and the resultant evolving business models, the born digital companies, we are already beginning to see this greater complexity and tighter coupling across all industries. Therefore, in my view, the normal accident theory already applies in today's business environment, and the so-called black swans will increasingly become the norm rather than the exception as far as risk management is concerned. And this again puts a lot more pressure on the risk management community in order to respond to this increasingly complex situations and complex risk on the horizon. Thus far, I have discussed the concept of risk in the context of organizations and provided some insights on stakeholder perception of today's risk management practices. These insights indicate that gaps exist with regards to meeting our stakeholders' expectation. At this point, I would like to pause for a bit and just discuss a high-level conceptual view of how risk management is implemented in organizations. To start off, I believe it is pertinent that we answer the question, what is risk management? And for this, I'll turn to the ISO standard for the definition of risk management. ISO defines risk management as a coordinated set of activities to direct and control an organization with regards to risk. I also want to highlight a key principle, one of the key ISO principles, which talks about risk management being an integral part of all organizational activities. Okay, now keeping this at the back of our mind, right? I just want to look now at how typically organizations structure themselves in terms of control, and management of its activities. Okay. Overall, an organization's strategic planning and control cycle consists of several tactical planning and control cycles, as well as many more operational planning and control cycles. This we can depict as in the diagram below. So typically what happens is there's your main strategic plan or your strategic planning and control cycle, right? And then this is cascaded down into tactical and operational levels, with each of these levels having their own different number of planning and control cycles, right? Now, integrating risk management into this existing planning and control structure requires that risk management needs to be, as highlighted in the definition and principle above. At every activity, we need to have risk management embedded therein, right? So the focus is typically not on managing risk, but rather managing the organization with regards to risk. To this end, applying controls and making risk-informed decisions across all the planning cycles and all the planning and control cycles of the organization. Okay, so typically, again, I want to refer back to the diagram on my slide here. So the diagram basically depicts the traditional denim plan, do, check, act cycle, right? And typically this is how organizations work. So at each point where a decision needs to be made, risk management's objective is to ensure that that relevant risks have been taken into consideration and that the decisions are risk informed. Okay, so this really is what risk management aims to do. I'll discuss this further on the next slide. Seen from another view, management's planning and control cycles are mainly aimed at reducing the level of uncertainty within the operating environment. Obviously, this is necessary as the level of uncertainty would impact the management's ability to continue to meet its objectives, right? To this end, management applies controls and makes quality decisions to align its operations to ensure it continues to achieve the set objectives. Now, this alignment is done at all levels, at strategic, tactical, and operational levels. Again, applying the plan, do, check, act approach to planning and control cycles for the organization, right? And this needs to be integrated with the risk management. So risk management needs to also occur across all levels where decisions and controls are applied to ensure business objectives are met. Now, applying relevant controls within an organization's planning and control cycle, as discussed in the last slide, is pretty much standard practice for both risk and general management practitioners. The same, however, cannot be said for decision making or for the associated human factors that can potentially influence decisions. So whilst ISO 31000 recognizes these factors under one of its guiding risk management principles, the one around human and cultural factors, there is little else to go by in terms of practical guidance with respect to managing these human and cultural factors. And therein lies a missing link for effective risk management. So to summarize, the constant factor at the heart of the risk management challenge is the people who have to make risk-informed decisions under conditions of uncertainty. This really is where the challenge for risk management currently sits today. We have now zeroed in on people who make decisions under uncertainty as being at the heart of the risk management challenge within organizations. To better understand this challenge, we need to consider the factors that influence people's decision-making under conditions of uncertainty. These factors can be classified as into visible factors and invisible factors. With respect to the visible factors, this borders on the context within which the decision maker needs to make a decision, the strategies and options available to the decision maker, the projections, the constraints, resource availability, the risk and uncertainty within the environment, as well as the goals and objectives the decision maker intends to achieve. Whilst this list is not exhaustive, it does give an indication of the nature of the factors that considered visible that can influence decision making. On the other hand, the invisible factors basically border on group pressures, personal biases, conflict of interest, and heuristics. Now, these factors greatly influence the decision maker and ultimately impact the quality of the decision that is made. In the words of, to quote Paul Gibbons, he says that business people need to understand the psychology of risk more than the mathematics of risk. I am in total agreement with Paul Gibbons' statement, because while the visible factors are taken into conscious consideration during decision making, invisible factors are hardly ever acknowledged, let alone considered during the decision making process. So, how is risk perceived? How do we perceive risk? How do we typically see risk? How does the decision maker perceive risk? This brings us to the issues around the attitude to risk or risk attitude. Now, typically, there are two spectrums, two ends of the spectrum with respect to risk attitude. One is that risk is bad, risk is avoidable, high risk means it's dangerous, risk should be prevented, risk management protects value, risk should be managed by specialists, discussing risk shows a weakness. Now, this is one attitude that the decision maker may have. On the other end of the spectrum is risk is natural, risk is good, high risk is exciting, risk should be exploited, risk management enhances value, risk should be managed by everyone, discussing risk shows maturity. Now, depending on where the decision maker falls within this spectrum, right, his approach to decision making would differ. Okay, the calls he will make or not make is dependent to a large degree on his attitude with regards to risk. So what is risk attitude? Risk attitude is a chosen state of mind, a perception with regards to those uncertainties that could have a positive or negative effect on the objectives. This perception forms a major part of the context within which risk is considered and decisions reached. So you see that the attitude of the decision maker with regards to risk is a key component in deciding how he makes the decisions. Okay? Similarly, we'll also look at culture of an organization, right? In particular, the risk culture of the organization. The Institute of Risk Management defines risk culture as values, beliefs, knowledge, and understanding about risk shared by a group of people with a common intended purpose, in particular, the leadership and employees of an organization. Okay, so how is risk culture formed? Okay, to do this, we'll look at the ABC model, which talks about attitude, behavior, and culture. Okay, now the model basically goes this way. It basically says that the individual attitude shapes the individual behavior. And this in turn forms the culture of the group. Okay, and the culture of this group influences the individual attitude and behavior, which in turn continues to reinforce the initially defined culture. So this is a self-sustaining system, hence the difficulties in initiating culture change within organizations. Now, if we extend this model to the risk space, in terms of the risk culture, we'll find that the risk attitude, either risk averse or risk seeking, right, shapes the risk behavior, which in turn forms the organizational or group risk culture. And this culture reinforces itself in form of the risk attitude and behavior of the individuals within the group. Okay, so ultimately, the risk culture impacts the decisions made by the individuals making risk decisions with regards to risk. Okay, so in summary, the risk culture is a general state of mind that is pervasive across the organization with regards to uncertainties which have potential positive or negative effect on objectives. Clearly, this culture would impact the quality of decisions that are made within the organization. Okay? Still on invisible factors, we also need to consider the way or how people think, as this ultimately influences the quality of decisions reached. Daniel Kahneman proposes that there are two systems used for thinking, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is driven primarily by subconscious values, drives, and beliefs, which influence our intuitive and automatic reaction. This automatic reaction is premised on applied heuristics or mental shortcuts. These shortcuts, or rules of thumb, are susceptible to exceptions and thus lead to cognitive bias, which ultimately impact the decision quality negatively. System 2, on the other hand, articulates and rationalizes in deeper detail the available information before making a decision. This, however, requires greater conscious control and focus. Generally, System 2 is more rational and typically has better decision quality. The challenge being that it requires a lot of deliberate focus, and it requires also significant effort in terms of utilization of the brain power. Now, Daniel Kahneman proposes that the way to block the errors that are originated from System 1 is as simple in principle, and that is to recognize the signs that you are in a cognitive minefield, slow down, and ask for reinforcements from System 2. So, cognitive bias, it's a way of thinking that might be common or even appear rational, but in fact gets in the way of logical thinking and typically results in poor decision quality. A couple of examples: groupthink or herding. This relates to the tendency to align with an overriding group belief, whereby the individual is influenced by emotion rather than independent analysis. Confirmation bias, tendency to seek out information or data that confirms with pre-existing idea, whilst ignoring contrary information or data. Anchoring, tendency to rely on one piece of information, referred to as the anchor, as a reference point for all subsequent data. Availability, this relates to the tendency to give undue prominence to readily available information. Sunk cost, the tendency to stick to a decision in order not to incur the loss that will arise from reversing that decision. Planning fallacy, tendency to underestimate decisions implementation difficulties, confident of the best case scenarios without seriously considering the worst case scenarios, or if at all. Finally, the halo effect, tendency to extrapolate one's success or failure in one area to other areas which are yet to be observed. And these are just a few of the typical cognitive biases which we need to be aware of, because they drastically affect the quality of decisions we take. So given the various invisible factors we've considered thus far, the question is, how do we make these invisible factors visible? One way is to apply emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence basically entails self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Now, with regards to self-awareness, this really is the ability to accurately perceive one's own emotion in the moment and understand your tendencies across situations. So basically, the ability to be emotionally aware and to accurately assess yourself increases the ability to identify and address those invisible factors. On the other hand, self-management relates to the ability to use one's awareness of his or her emotion to stay flexible and direct your behavior positively. Again, it requires self-awareness to be able to manage yourself, to be able to understand how which of those underlying biases are actually operating as you make those decisions. Social awareness. Social awareness, this borders around the ability to accurately pick up on emotions in other people and understand what's really going on with them, understand what kind of bias is actually affecting their thinking at a point in time, so you can address or direct them accordingly. All right, this relates to social awareness. While relationship management relates to the ability to use that awareness of your own emotions and the emotions of others to manage interactions successfully. Okay, this really is the way to go about trying to apply emotional intelligence in order to deal with the invisible factors that we talked about earlier on. So basically, applying emotional intelligence relates to recognizing yours and the emotions affecting yourself and the colleagues within which you need to make the decision, understand where they're coming from, be able to express and manage those emotions accordingly in order to lead to the best quality decision. So what else can the organization do to make the invisible visible? Adapt and apply a formal decision-making process. This, I believe, is a key requirement for all organizations. They need to have a clear formal process for making key decisions across the organization. This process should be applicable to different levels of the organization. So strategic decisions should apply, a particular process should apply, as well as maybe a stripped down process for tactical and operational decisions. Typically, the process would have 3 phases: a pre-decision phase, which basically addresses or identifies all the activities involved in preparing for the decision. The decision phase involves activities related to making that decision, as well as a post-decision phase, which looks at a post hoc analysis of the quality of the decision that was made. For each of these phases, ideally, we should have clear checklists which provide some sort of gate control for each of the phases. So within the pre-decision phase, checks to ensure that there is clarity of purpose, why the decision is required, the relevance to the organization and organizational objectives, the relevant stakeholders involved, the potential conflict of interest, real or potential conflict of interest. They also should have a designated devil's advocate for decision discussions. This basically aims to address potential groupthink. It should also ultimately, the checklist should look to create a semi-formal terms of reference for the decision. During the decision phase, criteria defined and for selecting options to be considered and analyzed. These are the things the checklist should be looking to confirm, and as well as that for each option, whatever information is necessary to perform the analysis for this decision is actually properly articulated, and the decision reached also well articulated. In the post-decision phase, decision reached is well articulated and addresses the terms of reference from phase 1. So there needs to be a cross-reference to the initial terms of reference defined in phase 1, that the decision reached actually met those terms of reference, and then some sort of quality in decision, some sort of measure for the quality in the decision making should also be used in performance reviews. And finally, the decision maker should be provided with sufficient sugar to increase the glucose levels, as this has a positive effect on our ability to make decisions under uncertainty. Again, this is the result of experiments that were reported by Daniel Kahneman in his book, Fast and Slow Thinking. So this short list of a couple of things that organizations need to consider in terms of looking at how to make the invisible visible. So far, we have been considering guidance on how to make the invisible visible. I will take this a step further now and provide to you a practical example based on a risk initiative I piloted a while ago. So the challenge in this case was basically the unsupportive attitude of a functional leader with regards to risk management. I'm sure a lot of us have found ourselves in this situation. So basically what we did was to create a perception ranking survey, which we tagged risk management superhero, and we requested employees to rank all the leaders relative to risk management. We adopted a modified NPS score with Net Promoter Score. So the approach basically was for ranks of 1 to 3, we consider these as active promoters, 4 to 8, passive or indifferent, and 10 to 12, active detractors. Now, the survey basically required staff to rank all functional leaders based on their perception using the following criteria. The criteria is basically sort of like looked at what we expected from risk champions in terms of the leadership. So we're looking at criteria that borders around sets distinct and consistent tone at the top, demonstrates and rewards transparency on risk reporting, role models risk management thinking and processes, considers risk management an integral part of decision making. Now, so employees were requested to rank. So it was a first ranking. So they had to rank every single functional leader relative to these 4 criteria. In all, a total of 202 employees participated in the ranking, and the votes evaluated as follows. So we took the promoters and the percentage of promoters less the percentage of detractors. The results clearly identify the concerned leader as one who is perceived as not being supportive of risk management, of the risk management agenda. And once we presented this, it became clear that he needed to go out of his way to begin to demonstrate his commitment to risk management. So clearly, again, we were able, just by using this ranking survey, to make the invisible in terms of his attitude with regards to risk, to make it visible and get him to take action to correct that attitude. To wrap up, I'd like to summarize some of the key points covered during my presentation. Firstly, risk management is about making risk-informed decisions. That is the primary purpose for risk management. The second point revolves around the approach to risk management, which leaves practitioners playing catch-up and stakeholders somewhat disappointed. The third point highlights the increasing complexity and tighter coupling, giving rise to black swan scenarios increasingly becoming the norm. The fourth point is that people who make decisions under uncertainty are at the heart of the risk management challenge. This challenge arises as a result of the invisible factors that influence decision making. The need to seek to identify, understand, and consider these invisible factors is crucial to the success of risk management. And to do this, we must acknowledge and make the invisible visible. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. It has indeed been my pleasure sharing with you today. I trust it's been worth your while, and I do hope you'll enjoy the rest of the Risk Awareness Week.